Welcome, Stefan Velevski on the Me&my Health Up podcast show. How are you today?
I'm very well, Anthony. How are you?
Fantastic. So great to have an exercise physiologist on the show. And we're talking about a subject that's very important because I see a lot of clients that are wanting to achieve this goal. And it's essentially the title of today's discussion is the right ingredients to building lean muscle mass. So I think that you're the right person based on your background and your personal journey. And I'd love you to share your personal story as to how you've arrived at being an exercise physiologist.
Yeah, so as a kid, I was always interested in sport. I did soccer, swimming, and Taekwondo. And then probably in my early teenage years, I put on a little bit of weight, nothing serious, but I wanted to drop the weight. So what I did was I started dieting, which I know looking back wasn't the correct way to go about things, and I started doing some exercise around that as well. So I got quite lean, so probably a bit underweight at some point. And I noticed, I wasn't as strong as I was as well. So I thought, let's get strong. Let's go to the gym. So I went to the gym. I started training from there, and from there started putting on some muscle slowly. And then the more research I did, the quicker I put on muscle. But along the way, I got some injuries because I wasn't training optimally, and was just pushing myself to the extreme all the time, which wasn't necessary looking back. So from those injuries, I did rehab from them, and that kind of got me really interested in the way that exercise works to rehabilitate someone and the effects exercise can have on the body. And from there, I was kind of really drawn into it. So that kind of guided me on the path through exercise science to exercise physiology to where I am now.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like your calling because now you're helping people avoid that sort of yo-yo effect that you experienced through those teenage years, early 20s to where you are today, and essentially at a more balanced, poised position around how to go about it. So there's no doubt you're sharing those learnings and teachings onto your students or clients.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, it's very exciting to do so. I like to see the change that people have and see how they grow and build on their knowledge they have. They can do it in a very safe and efficient way. So it's very exciting for me. I love what I do. So yeah, it's always good to see someone grow and become better person themselves.
Absolutely. No, and I can see it in yourself in terms of that personal journey, and you sound very inspired by what you're doing today, and hence why you wanted to grab this opportunity and have a chat to me on the Me&my Health Up podcast. And so really keen for you to share where you see people commonly making mistakes, your clients coming to you, where are the common pitfalls in terms of that building that lean muscle mass?
There's probably a few things. I'd say the biggest thing that they don't understand is progressive overload. So that's the big word around kind of hypertrophy is progressive overload. So it's about slowly increasing kind of your training volume over time. So what I mean by training volume is like your sets times your reps times your weight, and that kind of dictates your whole training volume. So we want to be kind of progressively overloading, so little by little increasing that over time, whether that be through any of them, through sets and reps and weights. So a lot of people don't understand that particularly well, and oftentimes they'll be constantly doing the same training program for months and months on end, and there'll be quite a lot of stagnation around that, and then they get a bit upset because they're going to the gym, they're going hard, but they're not seeing much progress around that. So changing up the training program as well is a big thing to do. Not that it has to be done every week, but every 6 to 8 weeks, having a little bit of variety in the program really does wonders for kind of your overall growth. Yeah, I think those are the two big things. But that progressive overload is huge. A lot of people need to be a bit more aware about that and be a bit more scientific around the way they train. So even writing down the numbers that you do. It's good to know the weight you do, but how many reps you've done previously, how many sets you're doing as well, and what that will look like in the next 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, and how you can build upon that. So yeah, I think those are probably the two big things I see with people that are quite often going to the gym and training, and probably another one as well is finding a program that suits the person and sustainable for the person. Just like I'm sure with dieting, people often find diets that are unsustainable that maybe work for a bit, but then they're not feeling great at the 4-week, 6-week, 8-week mark, and they're feeling not so fantastic by the end of it. So, I think finding something sustainable is a huge thing to do as well. So I'm sure you got a lot to say about sustainable dieting as well, especially with weight loss.
Well, and those 3 points that you raise relate exactly to nutrition and around building lean muscle mass. So that first point you raised about the overload, or essentially from my point of view, is it's the crash dieting, right? And as you mentioned, that doesn't work and it's not sustainable, it's not healthy. And I can see from an overload perspective, that's where you increase your risk to injury, getting an injury, because you're pushing the envelope too far and essentially not allowing enough time between training sessions for recovery, or just essentially overdoing it. And it's the same with the dieting, the crash dieting. As you know, personally, from personal experience, it results in really fatigue and low energy, poor performance at the gym. You don't feel great. You can't think properly. You're not working to your fullest potential. You can't solve problems as well as what you previously could. And your relationships are affected because your moods are crap, like you're at wit's end essentially, and so I certainly can relate exactly that point about overdoing it. And to me, it comes back to that not allowing enough time to achieve your goal. Essentially, people want results overnight, and that push for overnight results drives that overload of training, as you've seen and as you've experienced. And I've certainly been in that, I guess, with many things, that impatience. Your other point around variety of training, I relate back to variety in eating. And so just like with training, you'll get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. It's the same with eating the same foods over and over again. That gets boring, and hence the crash diet gets boring and people want to mix it up. So certainly getting back to that personalized eating, personalized training, as you referred to. So these, they apply across the board. That last point, now I'm just lost my train of thought. Just remind me of your last point.
So like this, we have the progressive overload, and then the finding doing the same program for a long time, and then there's finding the sustainability in what you're doing as well, so not going too hard.
So that personalization,
kind of blend it in together.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hence why I couldn't find the third point. So I certainly relate that from a nutrition perspective. The crash thing, lack of personalization, hence you can't sustain it. Lack of variety. So they certainly relate from a nutrition perspective. And I really think it's not seeking expert advice would be the other one. I'm sure you'd agree with that one. Yeah,
definitely. There's so many times where I see someone coming to the gym and they've just started and they're just doing a program that their mate's mate has written up for them because they saw it somewhere online, which is a little bit of a recipe for disaster because it's really not tailored to the person's goals or what they can actually do, previous injury history. The list goes on. So I think a lot of people don't really understand like that too much, that they just think I'm going to do a program because someone on the internet does it and they're really big and they've got a lot of muscle, so it must work. And it's about finding something that's personalized for yourself and tailored for yourself, or else there'll just be one workout program that everyone will be doing and that would be the best one, but that's not it's not how it works. So tailoring something is extremely important, and I feel like it's the same with dieting. There's some foods that people don't like and some things that people don't like to do, and they want to have this little treat, and it's got about finding the healthy balance between it all, which is tricky at times, but very rewarding when you get it right, I think.
Two very important points, particularly relating to nutrition, and that is that personalization. Everyone is unique and different in terms of their background, so where they've been, how they've been raised, and the micro. We hear the word of gut bacteria and having good gut health and all that, and that stems from our parents. That goes through our ancestral path. So relating all the way back to your point of origin. So. If you're in Asia, you can digest rice really well. And, if you're from Italy, then, or the northern parts of Italy, for example, well, that they have an association with wheat and being able to consume the bread and the pasta and without much issue, whereas other parts of the world that have been brought up on other grains may have struggles digesting certain, and so I think the great example is the Mexicans, right? They're the only population on this earth that can actually break down corn. all
really?
of us.
Yeah. That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, we all consume it, right? It's globalization, it spreads throughout the world. And so often I'm telling, I share with my clients that it's important to get back to what your ancestors ate and make that the basis of your new eating, because typically Westernization has turned that upside down, and essentially people are eating more Western diets and really have neglected their traditional roots. And so that's an important point, is getting back to your traditional foods. You'll digest them easier, and when you digest food easier, you assimilate the nutrients better. You have a higher efficacy of getting the nutrients assimilated, whereas if you're eating foods that your gut bugs aren't familiar with and can't break down or struggle to break down, then you're not getting the nutrients. So you might have this perfect textbook diet, but you're not assimilating it, and so it's useless. I think that's really important point around, as you mentioned, personalization. And I think it's also that thing around, we're all completely unique and different. We all actually have different health goals too. So my health goals aren't going to be the same as yours or anyone else's, right? Mm-hmm. There may be some similarities, but we have different visions of how we see health. It's a perspective, and everyone has that different perspective on life. So I think that's another important point, is that if you grab your mate's training program or your mate's diet or some diet off the internet and start copying that, you can guarantee you won't get the same results if that was tailored to someone else and really fitted in with their health goals. You may get some benefit, and I find with dieting, a lot of the benefits just come because people are cleaning up their eating. They've cut out the crap. And so it's not necessarily the fact that you're doing the keto diet or the paleo diet or the vegan diet. It's more that you've started to become disciplined around your eating and less westernized. So, so I think that's probably the how I can relate to, I guess, what, the field of your work into my work, and how they're very similar, but just changing the vice, whether it be exercise or nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. What you were saying, going back to kind of the roots, the way I think about that in my kind of setting is there's kind of like basics of strength and conditioning, the basic movements. So you've probably heard these before, but there's, for like the lower body, there's a squat and a hinge. So the squat is pretty self-explanatory. The hinge is more like your deadlift, your RDLs and everything like that. And then you have also a horizontal push, so think of like a bench press, and then like a horizontal pull, it's like a row, and then you got a vertical push and pull as well, and a carry also. These are like kind of the foundational prime movements, if you will. So it's more like the big functional movements, and they're oftentimes when someone's programming or they're doing the program, they skim over some of these big movements, which everyone should essentially be doing. Like these are the basics. They're foundational. They're fundamental, and they're there because they work, and they're there for a reason. It was just good how it like relates back to these are the big movements that we've always been doing for how many millions of years. Let's keep doing those movements because our bodies are built to move like this essentially, and we can move some big loads under these movements. So it's exciting.
Absolutely, and you took the words out of my mouth, because my question was the best gym exercises to get started with, and essentially you've answered that really well. So and tied it in with how it relates to nutrition, getting back to those traditional roots of where your ancestors ate. So the other one that I'm really keen, I'm sure the listeners are keen to hear, is your top tips around building lean muscle mass in the gym, or whether it be outside the gym. And maybe you give an explanation for both. So some people might not have access to a gym, and then others have got access to a gym.
I think probably one of the big things to do first is focus on the big compound lifts at the start of your exercise routine. So you could do your warm-up at the start, and we can probably chat about that a bit later. But for what I mean by compound lift is a big multi-joint lift. Okay, so as I was saying before, like those basic movements, they are all the big compound multi-joint lifts. So that's kind of what we want to be focusing on at the start for a few reasons. Because we've got multiple joints working, there's multiple muscles that are recruited. So with these lifts as well, we can usually push the biggest load with it. So we're getting a greater training stimulus as well. The greatest training stimulus is going to lead to more optimal growth. So focusing on these first, and then towards, say if you had 3, 4, 5 compound lifts, at the end of it, maybe 1 or 2, you could do like an isolation movement where you're just isolating one joint and one muscle essentially. With kind of the compound lifts as well, I would bias going a little bit heavier. So maybe it's that 6 to 12 rep range, and the isolation one, I would say going a slightly lighter with that as well is probably my preferred method of training. Because I ideally want to accumulate some metabolic byproducts and fatigue, which is the stimulus for the growth to occur through the muscle. So that's kind of a great way to go about it and do it. And I think the next tip, which we touched on already, is that progressive overload. I think that's just such a crucial thing. That's why I want to say it twice. So understanding that is really going to be the key to seeing that long-term gain, and understanding how you can change those variables, whether it be increasing the weight or maybe adding an extra set but dropping the reps slightly. So that's how you can kind of chop and change your routine to increase training volume over time and kind of see that growth in hypertrophy or that muscle gaining over time. I think those would be my 2 big things to work on to see growth. One probably final thing as well is technique, getting your technique right. So with those big compound lifts, we want to make sure our technique is correct before we're loading up properly. And that's pretty self-explanatory. I think most people know that, but I think most people don't understand the technique 100% correct. Which is why it's great to have someone around you that can correct your technique, and having that guidance is super important. Sometimes I wish I had someone to train me as well, because there's some angles you can't see from the mirror, so it'd be good to kind of have that loading, that understanding of what I'm doing through the lift. So technique's a bit of a hard one to explain online, but it's good to, even if you were to record yourself and like analyze it through that way, it's a great way to do it. So those would be my my tips, I reckon, for long term and sustainability through kind of progressive overloading like that. I think that would be the best way to go about it and gain some muscle. In terms of your end for the nutrition side of things, because back in the day I did a lot of tracking what I ate. So in terms of tracking my macros to a T every day, I think I even had a streak of a year where I didn't miss a single thing that I ate. So I weighed everything to a T. So I'm curious to see your thoughts on what people should be like, a macro split, or even like just overall calorie intake if they're trying to gain muscle. I want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. No, I was just relating back to what you said around exercise and translating that to nutrition. And that is exactly what you've just mentioned, macros and micros. So as you mentioned, the core exercises, the ones that are using more muscle groups, well, that relates well to the macro components of what you should be focusing on. And that's where your major focus should be, is on the macro. And if you get the macro right, you pretty much look after the micro. And your micro nutrition is your vitamins and minerals. And the issue today is people are fixated on the micro side of things and forgetting the big picture because they're thinking, oh, I've got to have magnesium. And these are all micro things we need in small concentrations and missing the big picture of as what we need in terms of macros, which are your protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And so we need to get those right. And then if there's a deficiency in the macros, then we can, focus some foods around addressing that micro. So the micros that I typically see deficient are like iron in women, and then iodine's probably another one that's overlooked, which is really important for thyroid function. And when we're talking metabolic rate, and metabolic rate governs the rate at which we break down our protein, carbohydrates, and fats. If your iodine, not your iodine, but if your iodine's low and your thyroid's under functioning, then your rate of metabolism is going to be affected. So that will affect your health goals. And this part is often overlooked, or it's either too much in focus. People are just focused on the thyroid. I've got to speed up my thyroid, and they miss the bigger picture. So I think to answer your question around the macros, again, it's a bit like you getting back to saying, well, if you don't have the technique right, then regardless of what you're doing, it's not going to give you ultimate or optimized outcomes. And that requires really a coach to get that three-dimensional perspective or that 360-degree view of what the person's doing and getting them doing the textbook technique and then just building that foundation and constantly working on that technique. And it's a bit like you probably experience when you're doing Taekwondo. You can practice doing speed of that technique, but if the technique's flawed, then you're not getting optimal power out of that technique. You may have the speed pretty good, but it's not as powerful as what it could be. So it's not optimal. And it's a bit like nutrition. So we maybe too focused on the carbohydrates and lowering them and miss the bigger picture that carbohydrates are needed in order for optimizing protein assimilation into the muscle, for example, or optimizing training performance. So that's the other thing. People will think, I've just got to go low carb, high protein, high fat, or something like that. And it's all, carbs the enemy, but their training is going to be impaired. So their workout with you is essentially going to be suboptimal. And what's, like for me, it's sort of thinking, well, I'd rather have the carbs a bit up, get an awesome training session in, feel great about, hitting my PBs or getting my milestones in my training. And that carb you would have consumed, that extra carb or few carbs that you've eaten, you would have consumed in that really powerful workout. So I think this is where people lose the context of, how nutrition ties into their life, essentially. So, and the other thing that I often see is people going low carb, their brain doesn't operate as well. And so their performance at work is impaired, and the ability to think outside the box, the ability to have good relationships is not great. So I think it really needs to be put into the bigger context of things. So just to get back to answer your question, because I know the audience will say, Anthony, you're just waffling on and not answering the question. It's very difficult. I can give some general sort of rules of thumb. So the numbers I sort of probably start with is around that 20% protein is probably a bit on the higher side for the general population, but then you're covering off, yes, I've got the protein tick, because the protein, again, you mentioned when you went underweight and it really affects your strength. Well, essentially, sarcopenia sets in. Essentially, we start losing muscle when we're, under eating. So our body will start consuming muscle to get energy. and that's what I find with some female clients is that they're undernourishing their body. They're losing all their lean muscle, losing everything essentially and wasting away. So really important that you get the protein part right. And I'm saying that's around 20%. Now that's 20% of total calories. Now, so I need to, explain this better because I don't want you to just think 20%. So if, and people think, well, what's 20%? Exactly. So, we typically talk about a 2,000 calorie diet. So I'm talking calories here. If you need to convert it to kilojoules, then times it by 4. So it's around 8,000. So we're taking 20% of the calories, the total calories of the day needs to be protein. So you take 20% of 2,000, you're going to get 400 calories essentially. So now you've got to convert that to grams of protein. So there's essentially 1 gram of protein will equal 4 calories roughly. So then you divide that 400 calories, divide it by 4 to get the grams. So essentially it's 100 grams of protein per day. Now you need to break that 100 grams over the course of the day. It's best, again, protein's best assimilated between 20 and 40 grams per sitting or per meal. If you go over, it's just additional calories essentially. The body can't utilize it as protein in that specific meal. So that 400 grams you could either have over 5, like 5, it could be, breakfast, lunch and dinner plus your morning tea, afternoon tea, or you could have just 3 meals, bigger breakfast, bigger lunch and bigger dinner, and consume roughly around 30 grams of protein in each of those meals. Now, you're probably thinking, well, okay, you're talking grams of protein. How does that translate to food? Typically, a medium-sized egg is about 6 grams of pure protein. You're talking like a steak, for example, 100 grams steak or 100 to 120 grams of steak will be about 20 grams of protein. It depends on how lean the cut is and what type of meat it is. So obviously lamb and pork is a bit fattier than kangaroo, for example. So again, it depends on the cut of meat, the amount of it, but I'm just giving you some rough guides there as to what constitute those grams of protein. So that's the protein component. Really important that you get that, because that's going to help with building muscle, right? So you need that. The carbohydrates is essentially your fuel. So it really depends on your total energy expenditure in a day, how active you are in your job, how sedentary you are in your job, and how hard you train. So it's, again, it's if I were to simplify it, I'd say, maybe start at 50% of your diet in carbohydrates, and people are probably falling off their seat because they're thinking 50% carbs, I'm supposed to be low carb,
Yeah, carbs aren't the enemy.
Carbs are the enemy, yeah. So, but carbs are the friends of the athlete. So
exactly, yeah.
So in terms of like 50% carbohydrates, we're taking that 200 calorie day, 2,000 calorie day. So 50% at 2,000 is 1,000 calories. Again, 1 gram of carbohydrates equates to 4 calories. So divide that 1,000 by 4, you get 250 grams of carbs. And people thinking, oh, that's a lot, And so, well, let me break it down. So, like, say, if you take 100 grams worth of banana, there's about 22 grams of pure carbs in 100 grams of banana. You get what I mean? Like, so people get this wrong conception thinking that, rice, it's 100% carbohydrates. It's rubbish. there's protein as well in rice, or bread. Oh, bread's just carbohydrates. Rubbish again. So there's fiber in bread. There's fiber in rice. There's also protein as well, and some fats. So, so like, if we roughly break it down, it's essentially like 10 medium to large bananas will equate to 250 grams of carbohydrates for the day. So that's over the whole day, 10 bananas. You're probably then thinking, well, that's not a huge amount. Like if you then break down that per meal, it's 2 bananas, 5 meals a day, 2 bananas, you know what I mean, or 3 bananas. So it's not really a lot of carbohydrates when broken down. And again, it does depend on your total. Like, so if some people in their jobs walk 15,000 to 20,000 steps a day. So that, and then on top of that, they're doing a workout with Stefan. So, you know what I mean? Like, it does need to be modified based on that total energy expenditure. And the fat, again, it's just what's left over. So it's about 30%. You think, 30% fat, that's a lot, So essentially, it is, in a way, it's 600 calories of fat. But in terms of gram equivalent, it's not much because there's 9 calories per gram of fat. Okay. So then you divide that 600 calories that we've got left over in terms of that 2,000 calorie day, divide it by 10 to make it easier. So essentially you've got 60 grams of fat, which is not really a lot over 3 meals. Particularly if you're having half an avocado and things like that, and, using olive oil and coconut oil, and it starts adding up. But again, I've just sort of generalized here and got a starting point. Again, it really depends on the person's goals and where they're currently at.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you're saying, it's good to find something that's tailored to them. I know it's tricky, but having those ratios is a good kind of starting point, I guess, that you can go off of. But I was just going to go off what you said earlier of the low carb, and I've tried low carb before, and I really did not enjoy it. I felt exactly what you were saying, no energy. My brain was just out of my head. I think I lasted about 2 weeks because I pushed it, and I was like, nah, this isn't for me. So let's try something else that works a bit better. So yeah, I think what worked for me was just kind of reducing everything just a little bit, just in moderation. So it's interesting. Some people swear by it. They say it's the greatest thing ever, but I really did not have that experience. So
I think we'll probably, I'm really keen to ask you about this warm up and cooling down. I think it's sometimes maybe over or underrated depending on what perspective you're coming from, but I certainly want to get an exercise physiologist perspective on that warming up, cooling down, and the degree of importance in terms of the bigger picture. And I can certainly relate the warm up and cool down to eating. So let's start with exercise.
Yes, I think it's important to do like a screening or an assessment to see how like your mobility is, kind of through the initial phase of the assessment with someone. From that, we can kind of tailor our warm up to the client. So if we feel like there is a mobility issue somewhere in the client, we can tailor the warm up to kind of still warm the client up, but target that mobility so that it's more mobile through the workout. This can mean they're a bit more, we're decreasing the risk of injury through that, and we can increase performance through that. And even if you don't have maybe mobility restrictions, warming up, especially, and when I mean warming up, I'm talking more so about dynamic mobilization. So you're not just doing the static stretching, you're warming up through movement. And warming up through movement, so that dynamic mobilization is really good for obviously warming up, preventing injury, but improving performance as well. What I would say for warming up that I don't particularly like at the start, but great for the end, is probably the static stretching. There's nothing per se wrong with it, but it's been shown to somewhat slightly decrease force production. So unless you do have a major mobility limitation that you need to really get into and stretch a lot, maybe do static stretching. I'd bias more that dynamic motion, to be honest. But at the end of the workout, definitely can do static stretching as a way to cool down and kind of downregulate and get back to kind of your more resting and natural state. And then at the static stretching at the end is another good way to work through areas of tightness that you're feeling and kind of just chill out a little bit before you go on throughout your day again. So that's kind of how I think about warming up and cooling down. That's how I would target it. Did you say you had something to relate back to nutrition in terms of this? I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
I did, and I could see how important to what you mentioned is to preventing injury, like doing the proper mobilization for what you're about to do in terms of exercise. I can see if you didn't properly mobilize an area and if you went, particularly with the loaded, big squat, and what could potentially happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it can be not great. So we want to obviously avoid any injuries or decrease the risk to as little as possible. There's always some minor risk of injury through weight training, but if you're very smart about it, you're minimizing that to close to zero. Because if you are injured, that means your training volumes decreased or you're not training at all. That means you're not putting on muscle, which is not what we want. So we want to be consistently training just to keep putting on some muscle.
And in terms of that, you talked about that progressive overload. In terms of that progression in a workout from, just you've done your mobilization exercise, then you're going in to do a loaded, say, squat or something like that. Mm-hmm. How much from your maximum weight should you start? Like, do you have a sort of a tempering or build up approach?
I would say if I'm doing a squat and I've done my warm up, like a bit of mobilization, I would start from a bodyweight squat and then do a barbell squat and then work my way up from there. So say if I was working towards like 100 kilo working weight, then I would be doing, so got my bodyweight squat, got my barbell squat, and then I would put on probably 220s on each side, so 60, and then I'll get into my working set after that. So I'm doing quite a few sets working up to it. Yep. It's about greasing the groove and kind of priming yourself to get into it. So, and in that, when you're going through the squats with the lighter weights, you can feel if something doesn't feel right. If something feels a bit tight, something doesn't feel right. That should be a sign to say, hang on, let's just take a little step back and figure out what's going on. Because if something doesn't feel right, something feels tight, something's more sore than it is normally, we should probably take a step back, maybe decrease the load that session, or try something else. It's about, being smart with your training, which has taken me a while to get to, but I feel like I've got some wisdom now to take a step back at times and realize, hang on, this is probably increasing my risk of injury going to do this. I don't want to do that because I want to keep training next week. So let's take a little step back sometimes. So.
Absolutely. It reminds me of putting it into that training session into the context of the bigger picture, because if you were to injure yourself in that session, how long is that going to set back your goal, or your ability to perform at that event or, so I think, you can sometimes get too carried away in the here and now thinking it's got to be the best, every session's got to be the best session, right? But it really needs to be put into context of where you're at and how your body's responding in the overall process of your journey towards your goal.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many things, like external factors, that can change how that training session feels from your standpoint, like their diet, what they've eaten today or the past few days or the past few weeks, their external stresses at work, what they've done in the day or the past few days. Maybe they've just been much more physical. They've done a lot of outside guarding and this and that. And this can just accumulate fatigue over time. And that accumulated fatigue can result in, breakdowns in technique, or you're not feeling as strong as you were. So if you're not feeling as strong as you were, we probably can't do what we did or what we're aiming for this session, which is fine. And that's life. And that's why we've got to tailor things and move things around as we need to kind of suit it to the person and suit it to what they're doing every day, and kind of hitting that right balance of still getting a training load in, but not going too hard, so we can keep going week after week.
Absolutely, and that relates back to nutrition, as you said. You wanted me to talk about the warm-up, cool-down period to eating, and I just wanted to touch on that point in putting it into the context of the overall picture. Is that just as stresses and what you're eating that day can affect your workouts, the same with nutrition in terms of sleep deprivation and stresses will affect what you eat and what you desire to eat and how much you eat and whether you overeat. So it's so important that you do look at the other parts of the pie, such as, getting a good night's sleep and, resting, as well as managing your stress, because it will affect, as Stefan said, it affects your exercise, and it also affects your eating as to what your brain's telling you that what it wants versus could be totally not aligned to what is on your plan or your for you to achieve your goal. So in terms of warming up, it's around priming the digestive system before a meal. And again, I just mentioned sleep deprivation. So if you have a poor night's sleep, then your digestive function's not as great. It's not as optimal. In some cases, you can be excessively hungry. In some other cases, you won't be hungry. And again, it is tuning into your body. Like Stefan mentioned, tuning in to make sure, if you've got a niggling injury, don't push through it. Again, if you're not hungry, your body's not ready to eat. And so if you force your body to eat, you won't assimilate or digest that food very well, and you're going to feel not great, and you're not going to get much from it. So it is important to really listen to where your body's at. And if it's hungry, then obviously it's ready to eat. That means the digestive system's working. And other things that can complicate whether you're ready to eat is whether you're moving your bowels. So if you're constipated, then your propensity to be hungry is reduced, because essentially you're backlogged, and there's the system saying, well, we haven't got out all the waste product from the previous meals, therefore we don't want you to consume more because we're struggling to get out with what's in there. So there's many factors that will affect your ability to want to eat, and so stress can go either one or two ways. It will either make you not hungry and you won't eat, and therefore you might undereat, or stress will make you overeat. So and that's where you get emotional eating, essentially, because you're overstressed and you're not coping. Then eating food can be a coping mechanism to the stress, but then that's not helping you with your goal towards building lean muscle mass. So again, it's important that you address the stressors. So that's, don't overlook that. And certainly that stress will implicate sleep, and lack of sleep will increase the stress the next day. So if you have if you're sleep deprived, you have good relationships, you tend to react in an emotional way, and they respond in an emotional way, and then it's fireworks, and then you're more stressed.
Yeah. I think sleep is so important and often overlooked. I think and relating back to this, it's where you grow. Like when you train, it's a stimulus that causes you to grow, but sleep's when you're doing your recovery, and it's when you're actually growing and getting bigger and stronger and faster and everything. So I think it's often undervalued, to be honest. And I think everyone knows how good they feel after a good night's sleep, but oftentimes it's not it's not taken into account as much as it should be. So I think everyone needs to get their good 7-8 hours or however long they need. It's great. It just does wonders for your health, I think, getting good sleep.
Absolutely, 100%. And you mentioned that's essentially where you're growing muscle. It's essentially also where your intestinal system is repairing itself. So a lot of people may have heard of that leaky gut syndrome and things like that. Well, if you're chronically stressed, not sleeping, then you're not going to get that repair happening to your body. And it's really hard to gain muscle mass. I tell you what, you'll be essentially, it will result in catabolism, which is the breakdown of muscle, which is going against what you're trying to create. So in terms of getting back to that warming up the digestive system, really calming yourself before you eat is important. So some deep breaths. I noticed Stefan was doing some deep breaths to get him into this conversation. And that's what I want the audience to do before they eat, is just the calm, deep, expanding the diaphragm, breaths, and really focusing on the breaths. And also it can be a point where you give gratitude for what you're about to eat, and that gratitude can help that assimilation, because essentially you're appreciating all that love and labor that's gone into putting that food in front of you. And the fact that you got it in front of you is a real blessing as well. So I think we really, take for granted what we're about to eat, and we just slam it down and then on to the next thing. We're not appreciating the importance of priming the digestive system. And this is where cooking comes into it. So the cooking process turns on our digestive system. And this is where, you hear people say, just don't have time, don't have time. But, they're constantly complaining of bloating and feeling yuck and no energy. It's because they're not assimilating their food, because they treat food as sort of a inconvenience. And at times it's an indulgence. So they're either making an inconvenience and hence not appreciating it, and then they're overindulging and just swinging the pendulum from one side or the other, and hence both of which don't help you towards your goals. So you really got to adopt that moderation approach that Stefan mentioned earlier around food as well. So really calm yourself, relax, eat in a relaxing environment. So it's best not to eat in front of your computer doing work, trying to solve problems. You're best to be outside with a friend, having conversation. That's when you're going to get maximum assimilation. And this is, if you improve this part, then you don't get all those digestive discomforts, disorders associated with eating, such as bloating. But again, there can be other factors causing the bloating, but it can help relieve bloating. It can help you maximize the energy from the food. So some people tell me, I feel tired after eating. Well, that tells me that they're either overeating or they're not assimilating what they're eating, essentially I feel energized after eating. I'm ready to go again. And that's how you should be if you're eating the right foods in the right amounts and you're eating it in the right environment. So really getting that set up right before you eat is really important. Putting down the knife and fork between mouthfuls, really chewing. So chew, 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 chew. Chew in excess of 20 times. Just start at 20. You should get up to 40. The food should be absolutely liquid before you swallow. So that's going to really enhance the uptake of nourishment into you and improve the digestion by doing that chewing. And that's the start, really, of the digestive process. Now, in terms of the cooling off, that's the other end of things, right? So you've got the warming up at the beginning, and then it's really important that we move our bowels and keep regular, because a build-up in our bowels results in excessive toxins build-up that causes inflammation. Inflammation will impair your ability to balance blood glucose. It will impair your ability to build muscle, because your body will be trying to put out the flames, essentially from the inflammation. So, and it's going to prioritize putting the flames out versus building muscle, because building muscle is only something you can do when everything's working well. So really important that you get your bowels moving, and that requires adequate fiber. And again, where do we get our fiber? From carbohydrates. So don't demonize carbohydrates. They have fiber. Again, eat the foods that more complex carbohydrates are really important to get the fiber, and the fiber will help you move your bowels. Drink your water and relax. Actually, the cooling off, you need to chill out on the toilet. Don't give yourself, I've only got 2 minutes to go, or whatever. Don't put yourself under pressure, because your body won't go. It needs to be relaxed. Mm-hmm. And, you'll see animals in nature, they'll tend to walk around a bit in a circle and then find their spot. And that's them getting in the zone for letting go, right? The same as us, we need to get into the zone, and, there's no point of doing work emails or talking on the telephone. You've got to really deep breathe, and really, and spend some time on there. You spend huge amounts of time eating the food. Well, we need to allow adequate time to get the toxins out of our bodies. So really get that cool off well, and then you'll have more optimal digestion and ability to build muscle.
It's very interesting. It's a few points I never really considered, because I always just wolf down my food, and usually doing two things at once when I'm eating as well, because it just. But something I'll try and consider moving forward, to not be as in a rush and give myself that time to, eat my food while not doing anything else, and kind of just spend some time away and chewing my food a bit more. So that's something I'll definitely try out and see how I go, because. I can get a bit of discomfort in the gut sometimes. So I think that might have something to do with it. So I'm interested to try that, because I've tried different foods and I kind of understand some work better for me and some don't. But I think that's an avenue I have never looked down before, and something that I've never considered. So that'll be something interesting to go into and have a look into.
100%, Stefan. And it's often overlooked in terms of losing weight. So if you eat slower, you register fullness sooner, and our body takes time to, respond and send the communication to the brain that, you're satisfied or whatnot. And so the more time the food spends in our mouth, the body's analyzing the macro composition as to the ratio and whether it's satisfied for survival. And so important to really spend time. That's where we most enjoy our food. So you think about, if you like the taste of something, keep it in your mouth for longer and you'll need less of it. You'll be satisfied. Yeah. So like if you're having chocolate, really enjoy it and just leave it in the mouth for as long as possible to really, and you'll find you'll eat less overall. The more you chew, the more you spend time with engaging with what's in your mouth and enjoying it, overall you'll consume less. So it'll really help with that weight loss side of things, as well as the improved digestion. So yeah, it's a big one, and it's very overlooked.
100%. That is something I've never really thought about too much. So next time I have a little treat for myself, I'm going to spend a bit more time with it. So enjoy that a little bit more, not just whack it down my throat and eat it in 2 bites and be like, oh, I want a bit more. So I think that's a really good tip. And every time I think about nutrition, I always just think about what the food is that I'm eating, but not how I'm eating it at all. Yeah. So it's a very interesting point you bring up. So something I'm really going to consider moving forward, because it's something I've never really thought about previously. So I find it really interesting.
In terms of the longevity and the study of the blue zone people, so large portions of the population living greater than 100 years, one of the most important things in terms of what they do is eating together and communally eating. When they have their meals, they're doing it together, they're cooking together. So it's that whole bringing together. And the food traditionally has brought us together, and it still does today. But we're overlooking, I guess, that part of connection and embracing the food and embracing the connection all together. So I think that is really important that we do get back to enjoying our food. We'll want less of it. We won't overeat because, again, if we eating stress, that's when you overeat. It's been an awesome conversation, Stefan. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really keen for you to share with the listeners as to how they can best connect with you and get some help around their exercise and achieving that goal of lean muscle mass gain.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It's been great. Great conversation we've been having on the podcast. I've learned a fair bit today, so it's been fantastic. So I'm at Longevity Exercise Physiology. So I'm located in Coburg at the moment. So if you look that up on Google, you'll find me there in Coburg. I'm working out the Anytime Fitness there. So you can come in and have a chat with me there, or you can reach out on the website and book in a time to have a session with myself, and we can get started on kind of the journey to building some more muscle.
Absolutely. And for the Sydney listeners, because you're also, longevity is also well established in Sydney.
100%, yeah. So I'm quite new in Melbourne in longevity, but Sydney, there's a whole lot of places. So if you're in Sydney, there is quite a few areas where we are. So I'd suggest having a look on the website and seeing where's closer to you. We're in Edgecliff, Randwick, Neutral Bay, and a few other places. There's a whole bunch. So there's definitely a lot of options out there if you're in Sydney. So definitely reach out and find someone from longevity up there.
Absolutely, and I can second that. I've experienced training sessions with the longevity trainers, and they're fantastic, take a very holistic approach and really live what they preach. So everything that Stefan shared today is how they will work with you, very personalised, very tailored to you and your goals, and look after you holistically. So they'll also bring in other providers to make sure that you achieve your goals. So such a great and I love collaborating with longevity. So thoroughly recommended, listeners. And thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Really appreciate you listening in each week. And please like and share this with others that could also benefit from, wanting to optimize their lean muscle mass. So thank you again, listeners. And thank you, Stefan.
Thanks, Anthony.